describing characteristics of Baroque music. Let's first describe Baroque music by what it is not. What you just heard was the first few bars of the opening movement of Beethoven's Sonata No. 8, which is more often called the Pathetique Sonata. This piece of music was written in 1798, which is smack in the middle of the classical period of music, which is the musical period directly following the Baroque period. The most obvious difference between the classical period and its predecessor is in its use of the damper pedal, which is the pedal furthest to the right of the three pedals on the piano. It's the most commonly used. And let's take a look at the pedals. The damper pedal would be this one right here. The damper pedal's function is to sustain the notes that you play. So whenever you press the pedal down, every note that you play will continue to ring until you lift the pedal. So watch this. Damper pedals didn't come into use until about the later 1700s, so no piano music from the Baroque period utilizes the sustained sound that the damper pedal provides. One of the biggest rules in performing Baroque music is never to use the damper pedal. So when no articulation instruction is given in Baroque music, notes are always assumed to be played detached or with space in between. And you'll notice that the snippet of the Beethoven Sonata that you heard just a little bit ago, it sounds very languid, very smooth, and run together at some points. Consequently, the use of pedal in Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata is a dead giveaway that this piece is not from the Baroque period. The next selection you heard was from the Romantic period, which followed the Classical period. It is by Franz Liszt and entitled Un Sospiro, meaning a sigh. You'll note that this piece also relies heavily on the slurred effect of the damper pedal. So if that weren't enough of a giveaway that it's not from the Baroque period, Liszt also violates another cardinal principle of the Baroque era. He gives the performer free rein over the tempo. In Baroque music, the tempo is fixed. It's very strict, rigid, and unchanging. Baroque music is the kind of music that you can tap your foot along to. For the most part, this rule applied to the classical period as well. In the Romantic period, however, composers began to play with the elasticity in the tempo, slowing down and speeding up for a dramatic or emotional effect. The last piece you heard was part of a Rhapsody by Ernst Damiani, who was a 20th century composer, thus putting him in the modern era of music. This was a tricky one to discern from the Baroque period. It has the detached nature at some parts that the Baroque period has. It has a clear melody that's very characteristic of Baroque style. Characteristics of modern pieces of music vary greatly, thus making them very hard to distinguish from other eras of music. In the 20th century, whenever the modern period came about, all rules of music pretty much went out the window. Among other things, contemporary composers were much more likely to want to captivate their audiences and hold them in suspense more than the Baroque period composers did. And contemporary composers did this with a technique called dissonance, which is an intentional discord or tension between notes, something that doesn't sound as pure as a good old C major chord would sound. For example, listen to this clip and try to listen to the tension of the chord and then it resolving into something more pleasing. Dissonant, resolved. music always has a clear and prominent melody line. As you're listening to a Baroque piece, you should always be able to pick out where the melody line is. It can move between the right and the left hand, and whichever hand is not playing the melody is playing an accompanying part, and the accompanying part should always be played softer or underneath the melody line. If, as a listener, you're unsure of the melody, the musician is probably doing something wrong. Here's an example of the melody line being transferred from the left hand to the right hand. Listen to both the prominent melody line and the accompaniment. The last defining characteristic about the Baroque period that we're going to talk about are ornaments. Ornaments are scattered all throughout Baroque music. There are quite a few turns and trills found in the Bach selection that we played at the beginning, so let's take a look at one of them. Or, here's another one. Now you know 5 characteristics of the Baroque period. You're about to hear the third movement of Bach's Italian Concerto, so as you're listening, listen for the Baroque characteristics that we've learned. The detached and clean articulation, the steady tempo, the clear melody, the quick resolving dissonance, and ornaments. So as you're listening, pick out those things, and hopefully you'll be able to pick out a Baroque piece of music anytime you hear one.